Have you ever stopped to think about the weight of a simple gesture? That kind of decision you make in seconds, driven by instinct, by empathy, without calculating the consequences, and that changes everything without you realizing it at the exact moment it happens. There are things in life that we do because we can't do otherwise, because closing our eyes hurts more than taking a risk. And sometimes, it's precisely this unassuming kindness that puts us on the radar of those who should never have met us. It was an ordinary night, the kind of night that ends with the same old tasks: lowering the curtains, checking the cash register, locking the door. She had done it hundreds of times already. The routine had something comforting about it, almost meditative, as if each repeated movement was a silent promise that tomorrow would be the same as today. But life has a cruel way of breaking those promises just when you need them most. She saw the man fall before she fully understood what was happening. It wasn't a stumble. It was a collapse. If his legs had simply given up supporting his body. He hit the ground with a dull thud that echoed across the empty sidewalk, and for a moment, everything stood still. She looked around. She waited. She thought someone would appear, that someone would do something. But the streets were too quiet, and that silence weighed like a choice. The choice of everyone who saw and pretended not to see. She hesitated. Of course, he hesitated. Anyone with a modicum of caution would hesitate. We live in a world where helping strangers has become a risk, where compassion can be costly, where we learn from an early age that it's not our responsibility, but there's something inside certain people that prevents them from turning their backs. Maybe it's weakness, maybe it's strength, or maybe it's just the refusal to become another one who closes their eyes. She opened the door again. She called him. She helped him to his feet, supporting the weight of a body that trembled more than it should. He didn't seem drunk. He seemed hurt. He seemed frightened. His eyes scanned the street as she guided him inside, as if every shadow were a threat. She offered him water, asked if he needed help, if she should call someone. He thanked her in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper, and refused everything beyond that pause. Minutes later, he was already standing, ready to leave. She tried to insist, but he only shook his head, murmured a thank you too softly, and disappeared into the darkness of the street before she could quite understand who he was. At that moment, everything seemed so harmless. A human gesture, a brief pause on any given night, nothing that would change the course of things. But the truth is that there are invisible lines in life, and we only realize we've crossed them when it's too late to go back. She didn't know it, but in the instant she opened the door, she became part of something much bigger and much more dangerous than she imagined. There were people watching. There were people who needed to find that man. And now, she was the only visible connection between him and whoever was after him. Have you ever felt that strange shiver? That feeling that something has changed but you don't know exactly what? As if the air has become heavier, as if someone has turned a page in your life without warning you. That's how danger begins. Not with explosions or shouted threats, but with silences. With details you only notice later. With the unsettling feeling that you did the right thing, but that the right thing put you exactly where you should never have been. She went back to her routine. She locked the door, went home, tried to sleep, but something had changed. She still couldn't name it. She still couldn't pinpoint what it was, but she felt it. And perhaps the most frightening thing was precisely that, the uncertainty. Not knowing if you're being paranoid, or if you should really be afraid. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will make you understand that kindness sometimes has a price we never imagined we'd have to pay. And somewhere, on the other side of town, someone was watching. Someone who knew exactly who she was now. Someone who wasn't going to let her get away with it. But she didn't know that yet. She was still asleep, thinking she had only done the right thing. That tomorrow would be the same as today. That life would return to normal as soon as the sun rose. We always think that danger warns us before it arrives, that there's time to prepare, to lock the doors, to call someone. But the truth is that danger doesn't knock on the door. It simply enters. And when you realize it, it's already inside your house, your routine, your head. Maybe you've experienced this in some way. That moment when you realize something has changed, but no one around seems to notice. You try to go back to normal, but normal no longer exists. And the worst part, you don't know if you're exaggerating or if you should be even more afraid. If this feeling touched you in any way, leave a comment saying what has impacted you the most so far. We read every word, every story you share. This is more than just a channel. Heart of Protection Stories exists precisely so we can share this kind of feeling. This need to believe that someone will be there when everything falls apart. And that's exactly what started happening to her. In the following days, the routine tried to return. The plants still needed water. Customers kept coming in, asking about succulents, taking small pots home. Everything seemed the same. But something was wrong. She felt it. It started with small details. The feeling of being watched when she turned her back. A car that passed too slowly in front of the store. The doorbell ringing, and, when she looked, there was no one there. She tried to ignore it. She told herself she was tired, stressed, that the mind plays tricks on you when you're alone too much. But then came the card. She found it on the doorstep that morning when she opened the shop. A simple business card, no name, just a simple lawn eagle with outstretched wings and a phone number underneath. Nothing more. She turned the card over, looking for some explanation, but it was blank. She put it in her pocket without thinking much, but the discomfort remained. And then, that night, when she went to lock the back of the shop, she saw it. The lock was scratched. Fresh marks, metal, gleaming where it had been forced. Someone had tried to get in. She froze. She rushed inside, checked everything. The cash register intact, the plants in place, nothing broken, nothing taken. But everything was disturbed, as if someone had rummaged through it, looking for something specific, or for someone. That's when the fear stopped being a vague feeling and became something concrete, palpable, suffocating. She locked everything up, grabbed the keys with trembling hands, and went out the front door. The street was empty, too dark, too silent. Whatever had started that night, when she helped an injured stranger, wasn't over yet. In fact, it had only just begun. And as she locked the door, not knowing where to go, not knowing who to trust, someone was watching, not from afar, not in a threatening way, but with the silent attention of someone who already knew everything. Someone who had seen this happen before, and who, this time, wasn't going to let it end the same way. This is where the story begins to show what's really at stake. To understand why she helped that man that night, you need to understand who she was at that moment. Not who she appeared to be to those who bought plants in her shop. Not the polite woman who smiled and wrapped pots in recycled paper. But who she really was inside. When she locked the door and returned to her empty house, she had returned to that city 3 years earlier, carrying only 2 suitcases and a broken marriage. It wasn't an explosive separation, one of those full of shouting and discovered betrayals. It was worse. It was the kind of ending that comes slowly, day after day, until one day you wake up and realize you no longer know the person beside you. And worse, you realize that this person doesn't know you either, that perhaps they never knew you. She had spent years trying to be the right wife, the right woman, molding every part of herself to fit into a life that was never truly hers. And when it all crumbled, she no longer knew who she was without it. Returning to the small town wasn't a choice. It was a surrender. The kind of decision you make when you no longer have the strength to try anything else. Opening the plant shop was almost accidental. She had rented a small space because it was cheap, because she needed to do something with her hands, because plants don't judge, don't ask for explanations, don't abandon you if you're not perfect. And little by little, it became a refuge. A green and quiet place where she could exist without having to perform, without having to pretend she was okay. But loneliness has a strange way of weighing on you. At first, she even liked it. Waking up alone, having coffee alone, making decisions alone. It felt like freedom. But over time, it started to feel like something else. It felt like invisibility. It felt like irrelevance. People would come into the shop, take their plants, and leave. Nobody asked how she was. Nobody really saw her. And perhaps the worst part was realizing that it didn't bother anyone but herself. There's a kind of tiredness that doesn't go away with sleep. It's the tiredness of not mattering, of waking up every day knowing that if you disappeared, it would take weeks for anyone to notice. She wasn't unhappy, not exactly, but she was tired of being the woman no one remembered. The one who was always there, but never truly present. Invisible. And that's why she helped that man. Not because she was brave, not because she had some heroic instinct, but because when someone needs you, even if it's a bleeding stranger on the sidewalk, even if it's just for 5 minutes, you come back to life. You matter. You have an impact. For a brief moment, you are no longer invisible. She didn't want to be the woman who turned a blind eye. Not again. Because I had turned a blind eye so many times in my life. He had ignored the signs that the marriage was falling apart. I had pretended not to notice that I was unhappy. She had let opportunities, friendships, versions of herself that could have been slip away. And all of this because I had learned early on that attractive women don't cause problems. They don't make waves. They don't meddle where they're not wanted. But that night, when she saw that man fall, something inside her refused to continue being that person. Perhaps it was an act of rebellion against her own irrelevance. Perhaps it was just desperation at feeling she was still capable of making a difference in someone's life. Or perhaps it was simply the decision to stop fading away. She didn't know, at that moment, that this gesture would change everything. That it would place her at the center of something dangerous. That it would cause people she had never met to start looking for her. But even if I had known, perhaps I would have done the same thing. Because there are choices we make, not because they are safe, but because they are the only way to continue recognizing ourselves in the mirror. And now, alone on the dark street, with the keys trembling in her hand, and the feeling that someone had invaded her only refuge, she understood something. Existence has a price. Being seen has consequences. And perhaps the biggest mistake wasn't helping that man. Perhaps it was believing she could do that and remain invisible. Because now, someone was seeing her. And not in the way she wanted to be seen. Comment below. This makes sense to me. What seems simple begins to reveal layers that no one expected. She woke up the next day, trying to convince herself that she had exaggerated. That the fear of the previous night was just tiredness, paranoia, loneliness playing tricks on her mind. Daylight has a way of making nighttime fears seem smaller, almost ridiculous. She had coffee, put on her usual clothes, opened the shop at her usual time. Everything normal, everything under control. But when she bent down to pick up the keys she'd dropped near the door, she saw the card. It was there, leaning against the doorframe, as if someone had slipped it under the crack during the night. A simple business card, thick white paper. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. No name, no company. Just a symbol in the center, an eagle with its wings spread, drawn in black, too detailed to be casual, and below, a phone number. Nothing else. She stood there, staring. She tried to remember if a client had left it, if it was part of a delivery, if there was some obvious explanation she was missing. But there wasn't. And the more she looked at that symbol, the more she felt a growing discomfort in her stomach. It wasn't fear yet. It was strangeness. The feeling that it meant something she should know, but didn't. She put the card in her pocket and tried to go about her day. She watered the plants. She attended to the customers. She organized the stockroom. Each mechanical gesture, each task completed, as if that could erase the feeling that something was different. But the hidden truth is that when you feel something has changed, pretending everything is normal is pointless. The discomfort only grows. That night, when he went to lock up the shop, he went to the back to check the service door. It was a habit to make sure everything was locked before leaving. But when he got close, He stopped. The lock was scratched. Recent marks, scraped metal gleaming in the dim light of the hallway. Someone had tried to force it open. Her heart raced. She pushed the door open slowly, turned on the lights, and went inside. Everything seemed normal at first glance. The boxes stacked in the corner, the bags of soil, the tools hanging on the wall. Nothing broken, nothing obviously out of place. But when she looked more closely, she realized the boxes had been moved. Slightly, enough for someone to have rummaged behind them. The drawer of the small cabinet was ajar, something she never left open. Someone had been there, had gone in, had searched. She recoiled, her breath quickening, her hands icy cold. He looked around as if the intruder might still be hiding somewhere, but she was alone, and perhaps that was even worse, because it meant that whoever had entered had already left, had already found what they wanted, or worse, hadn't found it, and would be back. Nothing was taken. That was the scariest part. If it had been a robbery, it would have made sense. They would have taken the cash from the register, the tools, anything of value. But no, whoever went in there wasn't interested in stealing. They were searching, and the only thing that made sense, the only thing that connected everything, was that man. The man she had helped. The man who had disappeared before she could ask any more questions. She pulled the card from her pocket again, looked at the eagle, at the phone number. Could it be his? Had he left it as a warning, or was it from whoever was after him? The journey of trying to understand what was happening seemed impossible. She didn't have enough information. She didn't know who to trust. She didn't even know if she should call the police, because what would she say? That someone came in but didn't take anything. That a stranger left a mysterious card. It seemed crazy, but it wasn't madness. It was real. You had someone searching for something, or for someone, and somehow she had become a part of it. Not because I wanted to, not because she chose to, but because one night, he decided not to close his eyes. He decided to help. And now he was paying the price for having been seen. She locked everything up, went out the front door, looked at the street before taking her first step. The city was quiet. Lights were on in the few houses still inhabited. The cold night wind carried dry leaves across the sidewalk. Everything seemed normal, but she knew it wasn't. And as she walked to the car, gripping the keys too tightly, feeling the impact of each sound amplified by fear, she didn't notice that across the street, parked in the dark, was a car. And inside it, someone was watching. Someone who had seen her leave. Someone who knew that eagle. Someone who knew exactly what that card meant, and who now had to make a decision that shouldn't be made. From that moment on, everything begins to change silently. Kaylin sat in the driver's seat, windows slightly open, engine off, watching. It wasn't the first night. It was the third. 3 nights in a row parked across the street, always in the same spot, always waiting for her to lock the door and drive away. He knew it was wrong. He knew he was crossing a line. But he'd crossed so many lines in the last few years that one more hardly made a difference. He saw when she found the card. He saw the way she held it, how she turned it in her hands, how she paused for a second before putting it in her pocket, and he felt a pang in his chest. Because he knew. That symbol. He knew it all too well. It was the mark of someone who didn't forgive, who didn't forget, who didn't leave loose ends. And now she was a loose end. Kaylin wasn't there by chance. He was there because 3 nights earlier, when it all began, he had seen the man fall on the sidewalk. He had seen her hesitate. He had seen her open the door again and help him inside. And at that exact moment, I knew she had just signed her own name on a list no one wants to be on. The man's name was Evan Dorsey, a protected state witness, a fugitive, someone who knew too much about powerful people and who had made the mistake of thinking he could disappear without a trace. Kaylin had been assigned to help find him, not to arrest him, but to bring him back before the wrong people got there first. But he had failed. Evan had vanished. And now, the only person who had had contact with him was a woman who sold plants and had no idea of the danger she was in. He should have acted sooner. He should have knocked on her door the next day, shown her his badge, explained the situation, and placed her under protection before it was too late. But he didn't, because placing her under official protection meant exposing the affair. It meant everyone would know she had helped Evan, and if everyone knew, she became a prime target. Sometimes, the best way to protect someone is to keep them invisible, and he had gambled on that. He had gambled wrong. Now she had the card, and that changed everything. Because it wasn't a message from Evan. It was a message from whoever was after him. It was their way of saying, "We know who you are. We know where you are. And if you know something, you'd better speak up before we have to make you talk." Kalen gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. He'd seen this happen before. Innocent people who got in the wrong place at the wrong time and paid the price. And every time, he swore he wouldn't let it happen again, but it did. Always happened. Because, in the end, he was just a small town sheriff, trying to hold back a wave that was too big, too violent, too inevitable. He should have left. He should have gone back to the police station, filed the report, handed the case over to the feds, let them handle it. That was protocol. That was the right thing to do. But he knew what happened when the feds took over. You know those revelations that come out behind the scenes of cases? Those hidden truths that nobody wants to admit? Well, protocol saves institutions, not people. And she was a person who had helped someone because she was incapable of turning a blind eye. And now she was going to pay for it if he did nothing. The transformation that happens inside a man when he decides to break the rules, to do what is right, isn't dramatic. There's no background music. There's no moment of revelation. It's silent. It's a decision made in the darkness of a car, alone, knowing there's no turning back. Kalen took a deep breath. He opened the door. He stepped onto the street. She was already inside her car, locking the doors, starting the engine. He crossed slowly, unhurriedly, one hand on the badge fastened to his belt, the other raised in a gesture that said, "Calm down. I'm not the danger." But when her eyes met his through the window, he saw the fear. He saw the way she froze, hand on the steering wheel, ready to accelerate. And he understood. To her, he was just another stranger approaching in the dark. Another threat. He tapped lightly on the glass. He showed her his badge. He spoke slowly, loud enough for her to hear through the closed window. "Sheriff Kiplon, I need to talk to you. About the man you helped 3 nights ago." She didn't open the door. She didn't roll down the window. She just looked at him, looked at the badge, and then back at him. Decisions weighed in seconds. To trust or to run. To believe or to be afraid. And he saw the exact moment she decided. It wasn't trust. It was exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that makes you stop fighting, because fighting alone is too much. She lowered the window just a little. Her voice came out shaky, but firm. "I don't know where he is. I just helped. That's all." Kalen shook his head slowly. "I know, but they don't know. And they'll be back." He comments, "This story could be real." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Kalen wasn't wrong. 2 days later, on an ordinary late afternoon, when the store still had a few customers looking at ceramic vases near the window, a black car pulled up in front. It wasn't the kind of car you see in that city. Tinted windows, impeccable bodywork, quiet engine. The kind of car that draws attention precisely because it tries not to. She was in the back, organizing bags of substrate, when she heard the doorbell. 3 men entered. They didn't seem like customers. They seemed like something else. Discreet but expensive suits, relaxed but calculated posture, eyes that scanned the room as if mapping exits, cameras, witnesses. They didn't pick up any plants. They didn't ask prices. They just looked around, slowly, without haste, as if they were evaluating something invisible. She approached, forcing a professional smile. "Can I help you?" Her voice came out firmer than she expected, but her heart was pounding. The man in front, taller, with graying hair at the temples, smiled back. But it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you can." We're looking for someone, a man. Maybe he passed by here a few days ago. Maybe he needs help. The journey of trying to appear natural when every cell in your body is screaming danger is nearly impossible. She swallowed hard. A lot of people pass through here. I wouldn't know. The man tilted his head, still smiling. Really? Because we heard you helped someone. Let them in. Gave them water. That sort of thing. The ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet. How did they know? How did they know such specific details? She tried to keep her voice steady. If anyone needed help, I helped. But I don't know who it was. And I don't know where they are. The second man, younger, with a thin scar across his eyebrow, stepped forward. Are you sure? Because lying to us isn't a good idea. She instinctively recoiled. The other customers sensed the tension and left silently, leaving her alone with them. The third man, the quietest, walked to a shelf, picked up a small succulent in a hand-painted clay pot. He twirled it between his fingers, examining it with feigned, cruel attention. Then, without warning, he dropped it. The pot shattered on the floor, soil scattering, the plant tumbling amidst the shards. She stared at the wreckage, then at him. The impact of that gesture wasn't in the broken plant, but in what it signified. They could break whatever they wanted, do whatever they wanted, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. The older man smiled again, this time showing his teeth. Be careful who you let in, dear. Sometimes, kindness hurts. They left slowly, as if they had all the time in the world. The door closed, with the soft tinkle of the doorbell, and the silence that followed was louder than any threat. She stood there, staring at the glass door, at their backs, disappearing into the black car, at the broken vase on the floor. And it was only when the car turned the corner that her legs gave way. She sat on the floor, among the shards, trembling. It wasn't just fear. It was the sudden and brutal realization that her life had changed irreversibly, that she was no longer safe, that that place, that refuge she had built with such care, was no longer hers. It had become something else, a target, a trap, a place where she awaited the next blow. She cleaned up the broken pieces with trembling hands, threw everything away, and locked the door early. For the first time since opening the shop, she was afraid to be alone there, afraid to close, afraid to open. The next day, afraid to exist in that space that had always been hers. Because now, it wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs too. And they had made it very clear that they could come back whenever they wanted. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every sound from the street seemed like the car returning. Every shadow on the window seemed like someone watching. She took the card from her pocket, looked at the eagle, at the number. She thought about calling. She thought about leaving. She thought about 1,000 things, but did nothing. Because what could she do? Where could she go? And who would believe her if she said she was being threatened for helping a stranger? But there's a hidden truth about fear that most people don't understand until they experience it firsthand. Fear doesn't just paralyze the body. It paralyzes decisions. It makes you doubt everything. It makes you feel small, powerless, invisible again. Only this time, being invisible wasn't protection. It was the opposite. And while she lay awake in the dark, on the other side of town, Kalen was also awake, because he had seen the black car. He had seen the 3 men get in, and he knew exactly who they were. He knew that the time for observing from afar was over. He knew that now, either he acted, or she would pay the price alone. And this time, he wasn't going to let that happen. This is where the story begins to show what's really at stake. He showed up that night. He didn't knock. He didn't call beforehand. He was just there when she got home, leaning against the patrol car, his uniform stained with dust, as if he'd come straight from somewhere far away. His expression was closed off, but not threatening. It was the face of someone carrying bad news who didn't know how to begin. She stopped in her tracks, keys in hand, heart racing again. Another stranger, another threat. But then, she saw the badge, saw the license plate, and something in her hesitated between running and listening. He raised his hand slowly, in the same gesture he had made days before. "I know you're scared. I understand. But we need to talk. Now." She didn't move. She just stared at him, waiting for him to prove he wasn't just another one of them. Kaylin sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and spoke directly, without beating around the bush. "You helped a man 3 days ago. On the sidewalk, near your store. He was hurt. You let him in, gave him water, and he left." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. She felt her blood run cold. She wanted to deny it, wanted to say she didn't know what he was talking about, but her voice wouldn't come out. Kaylin continued, his voice low but firm. "His name is Evan Dorsey, a protected state witness. He was on the run when you saw him, running from unforgiving people. And now, whoever's after him thinks you know where he is." The air left her lungs. Protected witness. On the run, the words echoed in her head, gaining weight, taking shape, transforming that simple gesture of kindness into something she couldn't control. She finally found her voice, but it came out shaky, almost a whisper. "I don't know anything. I just helped. He left. I don't even know his name yet, until you tell me." Kaylin crossed his arms, leaned against the patrol car, and looked at the empty street, as if checking if anyone was listening. "I know you don't know, but they don't care about that." Those words fell like a sentence. They don't care. It didn't matter what she knew, or didn't know. It didn't matter that she had been innocent, that she had acted out of compassion. To them, she was a variable, a piece in a game whose rules she didn't know. And pieces that are no longer useful are discarded. Her legs felt weak, and she leaned against the wall of the house. "What do I do?" The question came out desperately, because for the first time she understood that she had no control over anything, that no matter what he did, the impact of that night had already been made. It had already marked her. He had already put her name on a list. Kaylin looked at her, and for a second, she saw something she hadn't expected. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to responsibility. As if he carried some of the blame for letting it get to this point. "You have 2 options. The first, I put you under official protection. I get you out of here, take you to a safe place, and hope the feds handle this before they find you. But official protection means exposing the case. It means everyone will know you're involved. And that could make you a bigger target." She swallowed hard. "And the second option," Kaylin hesitated. And it was in that hesitation that she understood that the second option wasn't protocol. It wasn't what he was supposed to offer. It was what he was willing to do, even knowing he shouldn't. "The second option is for me to stay around. No official paperwork. No registration. Just stay. And if they come back, I'll deal with it." Silence. A heavy silence, full of unspoken meanings. She looked at him, trying to understand why a sheriff would be offering this, why he would break protocol, why he would risk his own career, perhaps his own life, for a stranger who made the mistake of helping someone. And perhaps he saw the question in her eyes, because he answered before she even asked. "I've seen this happen before. Innocent people who get involved unintentionally and pay the price because no one wanted to break the rules to protect. I swore to protect. And this time, I'm not going to pretend that protocol is more important than a life." The revelations of that moment weren't in the words, but in what they carried. He wasn't doing this out of duty. He was doing it by choice. And choices like that have weight. They have consequences. She didn't know if she trusted him. She didn't know if she should. But she knew she was alone, that the men in suits could return at any moment, and that between the uncertainty of trusting and the certainty of being vulnerable, the former seemed less frightening. She nodded slowly. "Okay, stay." And in that moment, without knowing it, she had just changed everything again. Because decisions made in desperation have a way of creating bonds that weren't meant to exist. He comments, "I saw that truth too." From that moment on, everything begins to change silently. Kaylin returned to the patrol car that night, burdened by a promise he shouldn't have made. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, but didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring blankly, trying to understand when he had decided to cross that line. Because he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew there was no turning back. He had information he could use. He knew where Evan was hiding. Not officially, but he knew. He had tracked his movements, followed the clues, pieced the puzzle together himself because he was good at what he did. And if he wanted, he could pick up the phone now, call the feds, give them the location, close the case. Evan would be arrested. Taken back, he would testify. The prosecution would get the conviction they had been pursuing for months. Justice would be served. The system would work. And Kalen would have done his duty. But there was a problem. A problem he'd carried since the day Evan escaped. Evan wasn't just any witness. He had information that went beyond the federal case. He had names, dates, transactions, evidence of corruption that spread like rotten roots throughout that region. And some of those names were people Kalen knew. People he'd sworn to protect when he donned the badge. People who signed the precinct's contracts. Who decided budgets. Who controlled who rose and who fell. He wasn't naive. He knew the world wasn't black and white. He knew politics was dirty, that power corrupted, that every system had its flaws. But knowing is one thing. Having to choose between exposing or protecting is something else entirely. Because if Evan told everything he knew, half the power structure of that city would crumble. And with it, families, jobs, the lives of people who perhaps didn't even know how involved they were. And then there was her. The woman who helped a stranger because she couldn't close her eyes. Who was now in the middle of all this, without having chosen it, without being guilty. And I was going to pay the price if he didn't do anything. Putting her under official protection meant exposing the case. It meant opening an investigation, bringing in the feds, starting the process that would lead to the revelations Evan carried. And that would make her an even bigger target. Because everyone would want to know what she knew, what Evan had said, if he had left any clues. Doing nothing meant leaving her vulnerable, alone, hoping the men in suits wouldn't come back. And he already knew they would. They always did. Because people like that don't leave loose ends. They don't leave witnesses. They don't leave mercy. And the third option, the one he had offered without thinking about the consequences, was to stay. To protect her alone, without official paperwork, without backup, without protocol. And that meant crossing the line between being a sheriff and being a man. Between institutional duty and personal choice. Between what he swore to do and what he believed was right. He had never crossed that line before. Not like this. He had broken minor rules before, like any police officer who works long enough. He had let minor infractions slide. He had turned a blind eye when the justice of the law didn't coincide with the justice of life. But this was different. This was making a decision that could cost him his career, his reputation, maybe his freedom. And why? For a woman he barely knew, who had made the mistake of being kind at the wrong time. But perhaps that was exactly why. Because he was tired of seeing kindness punished. Tired of seeing the system protect those with power and abandon those who only had heart. Tired of doing the right thing according to the manual, and seeing that what was right according to the manual didn't always save those who needed saving. The transformation that happens within a man when he realizes that his choices define who he is more than his badge isn't quick. It's not dramatic. It's silent. It's made up of small decisions that accumulate until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the man who swore to blindly serve the system. And you have to decide. Do you go back to being that man? Or do you accept that you've changed? That now you serve something greater than protocol? You serve what you believe is right, even if it means losing everything. Kalen started the engine. He drove to the police station. He entered the empty office, turned on the light, sat in the old, creaky chair. He opened the drawer. He took out Evan Dorsey's file. He looked at the photos, the reports, the names underlined in red. And then, slowly, he put everything back. He locked the drawer. And he made the decision he knew he couldn't undo. He wasn't going to hand Evan over. Not yet. Not while she was in danger. Because handing Evan over meant starting a process he couldn't control. And without control, he couldn't protect her. So I was going to wait. I was going to stay close. I was going to be the barrier between her and whatever came next. And when it was all over, I would deal with the consequences. Whether it was dismissal, a lawsuit, whatever. Because for the first time in years, he was sure of one thing: some decisions are worth more than a career. What seemed simple begins to reveal layers that no one expected. In the following days, Kaylin became a constant presence, not in an invasive way, not in the way you imagine protection. He was simply there. He would pass by the store in the morning when it opened. He would return in the late afternoon when business slowed down. He would park across the street, sometimes reading reports, sometimes just observing. She noticed. Of course she noticed. And at first, it bothered her. It seemed like surveillance. It seemed like control. It seemed like she had traded one kind of fear for another. But gradually, something changed. It began the morning she arrived and found the back door lock repaired. She hadn't asked. She hadn't mentioned it had been broken since the break-in. But he had seen it. He had noticed. And he had fixed it without making a fuss, without demanding thanks, without even mentioning it. It was only when she turned the key and felt the soft, firm, secure click that she understood. He wasn't there to control her. He was there to ensure she could continue to exist without fear. The following night, he brought coffee. 2 cups. He knocked on the door as she was closing it, offered her the paper cups as if offering a truce. "I thought you could use them." She hesitated, but accepted. They sat on the front steps in silence, drinking lukewarm coffee. As the street darkened around them, they didn't talk about Evan. They didn't talk about danger. They talked about small things, about how she had returned to town, about why he had become sheriff. Nothing profound, nothing too revealing, but enough for her to realize that he wasn't just the badge. He was a person, with his own scars, with his own reasons. And it was in that shared silence, in that routine that began to form without either of them planning it, that the bond was born. It wasn't passion. It wasn't a cinematic romance with declarations and promises. It was something else, more real, more necessary. It was trust built on small gestures, in the way he checked the doors without her asking, in the way she saved extra coffee because she knew he would show up, in the way that, for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt completely alone. She started asking questions, not about the case, about him. "Why are you doing this? Staying here, wasting your time with me? Risking whatever you're risking?" Kaylin looked ahead at the darkening sky and hesitated before answering. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "Because I've seen too many good people pay for things they didn't do. And I'm tired of pretending I couldn't have made a difference." She understood, at that moment, that he carried guilt, that there were stories behind the scenes of his life, stories of people he couldn't save, and that protecting her wasn't just about her. It was about all the times he had followed protocol and seen it go wrong. It was about redemption, about the chance to do things differently, and perhaps that's why she trusted him. Because he wasn't doing it out of obligation. He was doing it because he needed to believe he could still do the right thing. But confidence doesn't erase danger, and the danger was still there, waiting. She felt it every time a doorbell rang, every time an unfamiliar car drove too slowly, every time I was alone, even for a few minutes. The impact of those days under threat changed something fundamental in her. It changed the way I saw the world, how I saw myself. Before, she was invisible by choice. Now, I desperately wanted to be invisible again, but I couldn't. I had been seen, marked, and there was no way to undo it. One night, after another, coffee shared in silence, she finally asked what she'd been swallowing for days. "When will this end?" Kaylin didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, and she saw the hidden truth in his eyes before he said anything. It wasn't going to end. Not the way she wanted. Not going back to normal. "I don't know. But as long as it lasts, you won't face it alone." It wasn't the answer she wanted. but it was the only honest one. And perhaps that's why, for the first time since it all began, she didn't feel like crying. She felt something else, something akin to strength. Because strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and knowing that someone will be there, no matter what. It's understanding that the journey has no map, but that you're not walking alone. They stayed there until late, until the coffee was completely cold, until the streetlights came on one by one. And when she finally got up to leave, he did something he hadn't done before. He followed her to the car. He waited for her to get in. He locked the door, and he only left when he saw her exit onto the street. It wasn't a big deal, but for her, it was everything. Write in the comments, I understand that pain. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Evan surrendered, not to the feds, to Kaylin. He showed up at the precinct in the early morning, exhausted, injured, afraid he would be killed before he could speak. Kaylin negotiated, made calls, pressured people he shouldn't have pressured. And he got a deal. Evan would testify, but with real protection. Not the bureaucratic protection that leaves loopholes. The protection that involved immediate relocation, a new identity, a federal escort. And in exchange, Kaylin asked for only one thing, that she be left out of it. Officially. It took 3 days for the papers to be signed. 3 days of tension, with Kaylin sleeping even less than he already did, and her waiting for news without knowing exactly what to expect. And then, it was over. The men in suits disappeared. The black car no longer drove down the street. The store returned to its usual hustle and bustle. Curious customers, people looking for gifts, students buying succulents to decorate their rooms. Life returned. Almost. She managed to sleep again. To wake up without that tightness in her chest. To drink coffee without looking out the window every 2 minutes. To open the shop without fear of who would come in. The transformation was gradual, but noticeable. The fear gave way to something else. Not exactly peace, but something close. The feeling that she could breathe without counting the seconds until the next threat. But something was wrong. Something she couldn't name at first. Kaylin still passed by, but less often, much less. He no longer brought coffee. He didn't stop to chat. He would just slow down when he passed the store, look out the window, wave slightly, and keep going. As if he were checking off a task completed. As if she were just another item on a list of responsibilities that had finally been resolved. She understood what was happening, even without wanting to admit it. He was backing down. And it made sense. The threat had passed. His job was done. Evan was safe. She was secure. There was no longer any reason for him to stay around. There was no longer any justification. It was time for each of them to return to their lives, to the routine that existed before all this began. But the hidden truth was that neither of them had the same life anymore. They had changed. The journey they shared, however brief, had left its mark. And you can't simply erase the impact of having someone by your side during the worst moments and then pretend it never existed. Not when that person became the only constant in a world that crumbled. Not when you learned to trust again, to not be alone again, precisely because of them. She felt the weight of it every time he passed by and didn't stop. Every time night fell and she knew he wouldn't appear. It was a different kind of loneliness. Worse, perhaps. Because before, she was alone by circumstance. Now, she was alone because someone had chosen to leave. And even understanding that it was the right thing to do, that he had done his job, that there was no more danger. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left unfinished. And the worst part was knowing he felt the same way. She saw it in his eyes, in the brief seconds they met when he passed by. She saw it in the way he hesitated before waving and moving on. She saw it in the stiffness of his shoulders, the tension in his jaw, the way he avoided looking directly at her, as if looking would acknowledge what they were both trying to ignore, that this wasn't just about protection. It had never been just about that. One night, she was closing the shop when he stopped across the street. He didn't get out of the car, he just stood there, engine running, watching. She looked back, seconds that seemed like an eternity, and then he waved, reversed, and drove away. She stood on the sidewalk, keys in hand, heart heavy, watching the headlights disappear around the corner, and she understood he was saying goodbye, not with words, but with the distance that grew larger each day. She got in the car, drove home, went inside, locked the door. She sat on the sofa. He looked around. Everything was normal, safe, silent, exactly as it had been before it all began, and he realized he hated it. He hated normalcy. He hated the silence. Because I had had a taste of what it was like not to be alone, of what it was like to have someone who cared, who stayed, who chose to be there. And now that I had lost that, loneliness no longer felt like freedom. It felt like punishment. She picked up her phone. She opened her contacts. His number was there, saved since the first night they talked. She had never called, never needed to. He always showed up. But now, he didn't show up anymore. And she wanted to call. She wanted to say that she didn't want him to back down, that it didn't matter if the danger had passed, that he could keep showing up, bringing coffee, fixing things without her asking, that she had gotten used to his presence, that she missed him, but he didn't call, because what would you say? That she was safe, but didn't want him to leave, that she had become attached, that she had started waiting for him. It sounded desperate. It sounded needy. It sounded exactly like what she swore she would never be again after the divorce. So he locked the phone, put it away, and tried to convince himself that it would pass, that it was only a matter of time until she got used to being alone again. This is where the story begins to show what's really at stake. 3 weeks had passed. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of her trying to return to normal, to convince herself that everything was alright, that life had gone back to normal. But it hadn't, because you don't go back to what you were before when you already know what it's like to be different, and she had been different. For a few weeks, she had been the woman who wasn't alone, the woman who mattered enough for someone to stay, and now, she was just her again, invisible again, only this time, it hurt more. She was closing the store when her phone vibrated, a message, unknown number. She almost ignored it, almost deleted it without reading, but something made her open it, and when she read it, the ground disappeared beneath her feet. Evan didn't give everything away. You still have something they want. She read it again, and again, trying to find some meaning, some explanation that would make it a mistake, a prank, anything other than what it seemed. But then she scrolled down, and saw the photo. It was her, and Kaylin, at the shop door, the night he fixed the lock. The image was slightly blurry, taken from a distance, probably from across the street, but it was clear enough to show him bent over, working on the lock, clear enough to show her standing beside him, holding the flashlight for him, clear enough to prove that someone had been there, watching, documenting, waiting. The impact of that revelation wasn't immediate. It grew gradually. It started as a chill, then it turned to nausea, then panic, because it meant it had all been a lie. The safety, the relief, the feeling that it was all over. It wasn't over. It had never been over. They had only waited, observed, planned, and now they were back. She locked the door with trembling hands, ran to the car, started the engine, and drove away. She didn't know where to go. She didn't know what to do. She only knew she couldn't stay still. She drove aimlessly for minutes that felt like hours, looking in the rearview mirror, checking if anyone was following. But the streets were empty, silent, and that was worse, because it meant they didn't need to follow her. They already knew where she was. They already knew everything. She pulled into an empty parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing quickened. She picked up her phone, again looked at the message, at the photo, and then, without thinking anymore, she called. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. She almost hung up, almost convinced herself that she could handle this alone, that she didn't need him, that she had survived alone for so long that she could continue. But then he answered, Hello? His voice came out hoarse, as if he had just woken up, or as if he hadn't slept in days. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She took a deep breath. Try it again, Kaylin. Colin, I need you. Silence on the other end. A silence that lasted too long. And she understood, in that second, that he had distanced himself on purpose. Not because he wanted to, but because he thought it was the right thing to do. That it was what she needed. That he had fulfilled his part and now needed to let her move on. But hearing her voice breaking, pleading for help, changed something. Where are you? There was no hesitation in his voice now. Just focus. Just decisiveness. She gave him the address. He hung up, and 10 minutes later, the police car pulled up alongside her car. He got out, walked to her window, and knocked lightly. She opened the door, got out, and before she could say anything, handed him the phone. Kaylin read the message. He looked at the photo, and she saw the transformation happen on his face. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened. It wasn't surprise, it was anger. The silent anger of someone who knows exactly what it means and who's behind it. He handed the phone back, ran a hand over his face, looked around as if calculating, planning. They never stopped. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Kaylin shook his head. No, they just waited to see if Evan would say more. And now that he's in protective custody, they think you have something he left behind. Some proof, some file. It doesn't matter if you have it or not. They think you do. And that puts you back in the crosshairs. The hidden truth behind those words was even worse. She had never strayed from the target. She had only thought she had. And even worse, now Kaylin was in the picture too. Which meant she wasn't the only one in danger. He was as well. For being near her. For choosing to protect her. For crossing the line he shouldn't have crossed. She looked at him, and saw the same conclusion dawning on him. They know you helped me. The photo proves it. This puts you at risk too. Kaylin didn't deny it. He just crossed his arms, leaned against the police car, and looked at her with that expression she already knew. The expression of someone who had already made the decision before it was even necessary. Then we'll deal with it. Together. She looked at him, at the way he said it, without hesitation. Without considering the consequences. Without backing down. And for the first time in weeks, she felt she wasn't truly alone. It wasn't just his physical presence. It was his choice. His decision not to leave, even when it would have been easier, even when it would have been safer. He had returned. And this time, she knew he wouldn't back down again. Kaylin opened the car door and motioned for her to get in. Come on. Don't be alone today. We'll figure this out. She hesitated for a second, looked at her own car, thought of all the reasons to refuse, to say she could handle it alone, but she couldn't. And pretending she could wouldn't change anything. So she got in. She sat in the passenger seat. And when he closed the door and walked around to the other side, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The feeling that no matter what came, she would face it with someone by her side. He started the engine, glanced at her. We're going to find out what they think you have. And we're going to make sure they never come near you again. It wasn't an empty promise. It was a commitment. And she believed him. Because he had proven that when he said he would stay, he stayed. Even when it cost him. Dearly. Even when he crossed lines he shouldn't have. As they walked down the empty street, she looked out the window, saw the city lights passing by, and understood something. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it had only truly begun. Because now it wasn't just about surviving, it was about trusting, about letting someone in again, about accepting that strength isn't just about enduring alone, but knowing when to let someone else carry some of the weight. And perhaps that's the hardest part of any story, understanding that protection doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. It allows you to exist without having to carry everything alone. It gives you permission to be vulnerable without being destroyed. And Kaylin, unknowingly, had given that back to her. The permission not to have to be strong all the time. He looked at her again, and this time, he smiled. A small, tired, but genuine smile. "Everything will be all right, I promise." And she believed him. Not because he had control over what was to come, but because she knew that whatever happened, he would be there. And sometimes, that's all we need to keep going. If stories about choice, protection, and feelings resonate with you, subscribing to Heart of Protection Stories is your way to continue walking this journey with me. Comment below. I'm with you until the end. If any part of this story touched you, leave a like so I know. And there's a video here that continues in the same vibe of protection and truth. Click and follow me there.